I'm Dr. Erica Bove, and welcome to the Love and Science podcast. I'm your host, and also the founder of Love and Science, Thriving Through Infertility. I'm so excited you're here today. With over a decade of experience helping thousands of women just like you, I empower professional women to build their families with confidence and compassion. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Love and Science podcast. This week, we're going to talk about something that really will strike a chord with a lot of you, I think. And that's that situation where you're trying to know, who do I tell about this fertility journey? Who do I not? Maybe you're even lucky enough that you're newly pregnant after a long, long journey. And you're just really hesitant because not only are you navigating your own sea of emotions with the pregnancy and hoping it continues and all those things, but you're also imagining telling friends or family members who are going to have their own reaction, right? And maybe from your perspective, they're a little bit too excited. Or maybe, you're fearing that if something bad happens, that you might be sort of stuck with all of their grief in addition to yours and really kind of not knowing what to do with that. So what I wanted to do in this episode, which was inspired by one of my amazing clients, is to really give some suggestions for friends and family members who, like I said in the Fertile Friend episodes 1 and 2, if you haven't listened, then please go back and listen to those. That'll give you some additional information. But what to do when you're feeling excited, you're feeling like you want to be in the know, and you don't quite know what to do with that, right? You want to be supportive, you want to be sensitive, but you're not quite sure what to do with that. So today I'm going to be providing 5 suggestions. If you're a friend or family member who knows someone undergoing this process, to really allow you to give the most support possible in the most steady way possible that hopefully will allow the person going through this to feel as safe as possible and as open as possible so that the relationship can be as helpful as possible during this difficult time. So I'll just preface this by saying, if you've never gone through infertility treatments or you've never had recurrent losses yourself, it can be very, very hard to understand just the depths of despair that this is, right? It feels like death. It feels like nothing's ever going to work. It's a really, really dark time for people. And even if you can say, oh no, it's going to work sometime, don't worry about it. You just need to do X, Y, Z. That's not hopeful in terms of honoring the experience of the other person, because it really does feel like death and darkness, from the perspective of the person who's struggling. And so even if there is good news along the way, maybe somebody gets, a good group of embryos, or maybe they even have a new pregnancy, I think tempering the excitement, knowing what to say and what not to say, these sorts of things can go a long way. So just as you listen to these suggestions, if you're the person supporting somebody, who's going through this process, just understand that maybe how you see the situation is going to be in a much brighter light than the way that the person themselves is experiencing it. And that's okay. But just try and imagine it from the perspective of the person who's suffering, and just know that your brightness might be more helpful if it's turned down a few notches, if that makes sense. Okay. So my first suggestion of how to help a friend who recently has good news is to really let them lead the way. I think about all the different holiday gatherings we have, and either just check-ins about, oh, I know you had an egg retrieval, or I know you had an embryo transfer, or a beta HCG, all those things. Ask them ahead of time how they want you to check in with them. Do they want to discuss? Do they not? Do they want to be the one to share the information? Because so much of the fertility process is not being in the driver's seat, right? Feeling out of control, feeling powerless. And if there's one thing that a person can really have agency over other than mindset, is really kind of how much information to share and in what way and with whom. And so if you acknowledge that, you're here to be supportive, you want this information to be shared on the timeline that works for them, right? Then I would say, I'm going to take your lead. I want to be sensitive to the fact that you may not want to talk about these things. You may not want to give me updates, but if you want me to check in, let me know. And that's what I'll do. Or if you're going to see them at like a dinner out or a holiday gathering or something, just ask them ahead of time, how do you want to handle that situation? I think it's a lot better when the person who's going through the experience is the one who is sort of calling the shots in this way. And I mean, that might mean that they've gotten their beta HCG and they haven't told you yet. And in that situation, if they've said, I need some space, I'll tell you when I have something to share. It really means that you need to honor that boundary, right? And that will actually strengthen the friendship in the long term. But just sort of saying they're the one, this is their news, this is their health, I'm going to take their lead. I think that really goes a long way. So the second suggestion I have for somebody who is in your situation, right? You're a friend, a family member who is trying to support a person who, is going through this process. And like I said, maybe has even gotten good news recently, is just to recognize the things that you may do that causes discomfort. So, for instance, maybe it's that you dream about the future together and kind of assume that there's going to be children in the mix, right? Like maybe there's that. And that vision is so far from what the person who's struggling can see that that's like, a wound that's festering and painful. And really it gets reopened by sharing that vision of having, your families be together when perhaps you have children and the other person doesn't, right? That's a very painful chasm. Maybe it's that you sort of probe too much from their perspective and want details on the process. And maybe they really prefer that you back off and that it really does make them uncomfortable when you check in so much, right? Um, Maybe it's that you have a toddler and the only times that you get together, you bring the toddler with you. And, just as a reminder, anytime somebody with infertility sees a little one, it really is quite triggering. Even if it's like, rationally, we know that babies are cute and toddlers are often cute and all those things. Like when somebody else has something that you really and maybe even desperately want to have, just that sort of difference, that awareness that somebody else has and you don't, it's just human nature to feel jealous and sometimes even resentful. So really be mindful of like how your presence, how your words, how the people you bring with you might make that person uncomfortable and just be sensitive, right? I really do think, it's everyone's responsibility to communicate what they want and need, right, to the other person. So I do think that like this may even warrant a conversation like, hey, I know that you're going through this fertility journey. And I know that, there may be things that I'm unconsciously doing that are making you uncomfortable or might, increase your pain. And I don't want to do that. Like, have I said something thus far that made you feel uncomfortable? Or what sorts of things would you prefer that we not talk about? Like, I really want to be as sensitive as possible and understanding that I haven't gone through this. Like, I may not know the right words to use. I may say things I don't mean, and I don't want to do that. So just being really open because it's not something like, I can create a list, I meaning Coach Erica, like a list of all the things that are triggering to people who are struggling, because for every single person, that list is going to look a little bit different, right? Maybe it's that like on a certain anniversary of a miscarriage, right? Maybe the due date of the baby that would have been had things continued differently. Maybe it's that there's some sensitivity and you plan to do a little ritual that day. Like it's not always about avoiding things. Sometimes it's about adding things in, but it's just like that sensitivity that the experience of that other person is not the same as your experience. And so really thinking very intentionally about, what actions can I do to make this person feel more safe and loved and supported? What can I do so as not to trigger another person even if I don't mean to, how can I increase my awareness so that my very presence is more loving and less triggering to somebody for whom I care deeply about? So, like I said, I do think that, especially if it's a close friendship or family member, like these upfront conversations can be really, really helpful. But just committing to the fact that it's a safe space, that, you're talking because you care, because you want to maintain the friendship, you want to deepen the friendship, you want to grow in love and support. That's the point. And so it does take some humility, and some lack of defensiveness. If your friend says, "Oh yeah, that time that you sort of said XYZ, or told me I just needed to go on a vacation to relax, like that was really painful." Like whatever it is, like approach it with humility, but just understand that we can all do better and we can all create safer spaces. And so just take it with spirit of openness that, we're all learning how to better love, how to better support. And I think even the sheer fact of doing this will help that person feel more supported. The third suggestion I have is I've heard this a lot lately, that people often assume that because their particular cultural traditions or ways of interacting are a certain way, that that's the way that the other person wants to be communicated with. So, like one example is, I was talking to somebody recently, an acquaintance, who is saying, "Oh, you know, you don't understand in my culture, like there's no boundaries." This is actually somebody who was pregnant. There's no boundaries. Like all these people live together. There's no personal space. There's no emotional space. And, I just understand as a pregnant person that, I'm just not going to have any space. And so, for instance, that is somebody who might then treat other people in their lives with that same set of rules, right? So it's like, okay, I can ask people any question at any hour, any time, or this is just how people communicate. Like boundaries are not really a thing, but they are a thing. Loving and flexible boundaries do help us. And so, you know, in that situation, that person was actually, they were speaking about themselves. They were saying, like, I expect that I can have no boundaries because this is my cultural tradition. And in my tradition, we just don't have any boundaries. And so just that awareness that, well, maybe that's not true. Maybe you can set a boundary. What would that look like? Right. Um, maybe there's somebody from a culture where, family is very important and there's just always many family members around. People ask very personal questions all the time, all those things. And they're like, "Oh, but that's just how I am. That's just how we communicate." I would argue that, just because we're from a certain culture with certain ways of relating to each other, that doesn't mean that we can't learn new ways of being and communicating and loving each other, right? I'm from an Italian Catholic family where, hey, there weren't a lot of personal boundaries growing up either, and I have to say, like, as much as I love my tradition, there's things that are good about that and things that aren't so good about that. And I think as I've gotten older, I've realized, okay, like, well, where can a boundary help a situation? Like, what do I need to do to feel authentic? And also assuming just because I'm from this tradition and this is how people act with a pregnancy test or act with a baby shower or delivery, whatever, that doesn't mean that other people want and expect that same sort of treatment with those sorts of mores and those sorts of rules. And so this comes back to the first point of letting the person who is struggling with infertility lead the way, even if they've just gotten good news, right? Like so many people say, "Well, I don't want to tell my family and friends because I'm just worried that they're going to be overly excited," right? And you might be listening and being like, "What? There's no such thing as overly excited. This is a new baby coming into the world. Like this person's been struggling all this time." But I think really understanding that, again, the experience of the person who has been struggling, it's a dark place, right? It's a place of hopelessness. It's a place of despair. It's a place of a lot of bad news in the past. And so really people need to take this step by step with the news. So that leads into my fourth suggestion, which is to temper your excitement. That may sound super strange, right? Like, why would I ever need to temper my excitement? But I will say that the number one reason why people with infertility don't share what they're going through with family and friends is because the emotions of other people are just adding a burden that is too much compared to their own set of feelings and emotions and stresses. So, my best recommendation is to really just sort of turn the notch down, a few notches, right? Turn the volume down on the excitement, because what's happening is that the person who is getting the good news, they're just like, when's the other shoe going to drop, right? Like, what bad news is down the road for me? Because all I've ever gotten is bad news. And so the more neutral, or sort of the more regulated you can be about this situation, the more safe that other person is going to feel in terms of trusting that whatever happens is going to be okay, right? Because if the well-meaning friend, right, like gets super excited and jumps up and down and gives somebody a hug, the first thought that's going to come into the mind of the person I'm congratulating is, oh, shoot, when something goes wrong, there's going to be a big fall from grace here, right? Like, I'm really going to have to comfort this person in their grief when things don't go well. So I think really taking a very metered, very perceptive, very sensitive stance, like, hey, I'm so glad to hear this news. Like, I know it's been such a long road for you. We're going to take this step by step, right? Like, not getting too far ahead, focusing on what the person just shared, acknowledging that it's good news, but not being overly excited. I really think that's the best space, because, you might be thinking 10 steps ahead. Oh, our kids are going to be in, school together. We're going to go on vacations together and all that stuff. But at this point, the person who's struggling cannot vision that baby yet, right? It's still a pregnancy. It's still a beta HCG. It's still oftentimes, especially when someone's been, struggling for so long. So just really turn the volume down. I'm not saying to be Eeyore, but I'm saying to really just acknowledge that that person is extra sensitive to everything. And so acknowledging the good news, taking their lead, that's really the best way to go. My fifth suggestion, if you are in the life of somebody who is struggling with infertility and, maybe even has gotten good news, because that's sort of the flavor of this podcast today, is to really come back to gratitude and the longevity of the friendship. And every single friendship has seasons, right? There's chapters. Maybe somebody started a new job. Maybe somebody moved across the country. Maybe somebody's newly pregnant. Maybe somebody's going through infertility. Like, there's different phases of life. And I think sometimes it's really helpful to zoom out with love and appreciation and just think about how grateful we are for that other person, right? Just like see all of them. Think about how long you've known them. Think about everything you've gone through together. Think about how they helped you through the hard times. And maybe now you can be a support during this hard time, right? And really express that gratitude, because I think so often we get really caught up in the details. Like, what was that beta HCG? What was your ultrasound? What are your next steps? All these things. And sometimes that's traumatic, and the person themselves may not want to talk through all those things. But I think that if we can take 3 steps back and just be like, I'm so glad we're friends. I'm so glad that we have each other for the hard times and the good times. And, you're a forever friend for me. We're in it for the long haul together, right? Like I can think of a few friends of mine who really meet that bill. Like, I know that we're forever friends, and what a beautiful thing. So sometimes just taking a step back and thinking about the big picture can be really helpful to just say, yeah, this is a season. It may look a little different than some other seasons, but I know we're going to get through it together. Okay. So with that, I'm going to review my 5 suggestions for the person who is supporting somebody with infertility, especially in the setting of some recent good news, to really help to create that culture of safety, that safe space, that loving, respectful, nurturing environment, so that the person feels comfortable continuing to share if that's applicable, and, really trying to understand, especially if you haven't gone through this yourself, how to be as supportive as possible. So, number 1 is let the person themselves lead the way. Or like, whether it's sharing information or withholding information or bringing things up or not, like, ask them exactly what they want and do your very best to give them what they want in that way. My second suggestion is to recognize the things that you do that might trigger them or make them feel uncomfortable. Because again, Like, we don't have this awareness until somebody shares it with us. We might even not know that something we said was hurtful. So welcome that conversation, come from a place of love and support. And then that will give you the awareness that, there may be things that you've already done that are hurtful, or it also might give you a sense of what to avoid moving forward, or maybe even what to add in to help somebody feel as supported as possible. My third suggestion is to really have some cultural sensitivity and to recognize that maybe your own cultural tradition does not have the same ways of communicating that the person needs in this moment. So try and take a step back, look at yourself as a human, understand that maybe your conditioning or ways of growing up might not serve your friend at this moment. And maybe it does, but maybe it doesn't. And just really look at them and ask them what they need and meet them where they are. My fourth suggestion is to take the lead of the other person in terms of the level of excitement. My experience working with tens of thousands of women with infertility is that when good news finally happens, nobody's excited. It's like neutral at best because it's really just sort of walking this tightrope of saying, okay, like finally something went well. I still feel scared. I still feel anxious. I still feel something bad like might happen, but I'm going to keep walking forward and make it to the next milestone. So, hey, if your friend with infertility is super excited and crying tears of joy, then by all means, meet them where they are. But you kind of want to mirror them in where they're at emotionally, because otherwise it's just too much. And then your feelings actually become a burden to the other person. And again, everything that we're talking about today is in the spirit of sort of making it as easy as possible for a friend to open up and share and just feel safe and supported. And again, if you know me in real life, you know that like I wear my heart on my sleeve. As my boss says, like you never don't know what I'm thinking at any moment, right? So it's like I really do also think about this in my own life, and I'm very conscious and intentional when I approach somebody who's had a long journey to really take their lead, because I know that will be a safe zone both for me and both for them, and that I will then tune into my intuition and offer the support they need. But again, an emotional mismatch, it just doesn't help anybody. All right, my last suggestion is one of my favorite things, which is gratitude. Really think about the longevity of the friendship. Think about how long you've been friends with that person, everything you've gone through together, and just recognize that this infertility time is a season, that maybe you're at different stages of your family building. That's a season, and just really hold space for that person with love and gratitude and appreciation. Share with them how much you care about them. And I really do think that, it's kind of like marriage, right? We say in sickness and in health. I think that, good friendships really do go through different seasons of good news for some and bad news for others. But just knowing that you're connected in love and respect, I think that that goes a really long way. So with that, I will leave you. I hope this helps lots of people who are, supporting people with infertility to be just a little more sensitive, a little bit more humble. Again, everyone here is well meaning. It's just if I had a nickel for every single time somebody said that they had heard something that they received as insensitive, it gives me a lot of pain understanding how much lack of awareness there is out there in very well-meaning people. So my goal here is to bring awareness and to help improve relationships and really to create a little bit more safety for people who are navigating this journey. I love you. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Love and Science podcast. I'm so glad you joined us today. If you found this conversation valuable, if you could please rate, review, and share this podcast with your trusted people, it would mean so much to me. If you want more tools to help you navigate the fertility journey, please book a discovery call with me today. The link is in the show notes. Please do not let infertility have the final word. I'm here to take the burden from you so that you can achieve your goal of building your family. In gratitude, this is Dr. Erica Bove. I'm rooting for you always.